All right, we're going to bring Fynn in here, or as he's called in here, Matcha. Fynn, how's it going?
Derek, how are you?
Hey, doing good. So for those watching now and those that'll be watching when we publish this on the page, you and I met like a while ago now, and just instantly we started talking about this like shift in the e-commerce technology landscape. And so that's what brought about this session today. And I thought we could take this conversation, make it public, and even perhaps interactive in a way where we can all talk about the changing landscape. And I don't know if you caught it earlier, but for anybody that's been watching or listening to the previous sessions, John alluded to this shift in partners acquiring partners, and in fast consolidation, in the increase of consolidation, the e-commerce technology landscape. And so, Fynn, I just want to close out today's series of amazing sessions with you and just talk about this. But before we get into it, tell us a little bit about you and even about Matcha as well. And if a lot of people here would be on the app or partner side, and how they might want to get in touch with you to form a partnership.
Yeah, sure. And I know we want to talk about the broader theme, so I won't spend too much time on that. But my name is Fynn Glover. I am from Chattanooga, Tennessee originally. I live in Atlanta today. I founded a company called rootsrated.com, which was a publishing company, and then eventually evolved into a content marketing SaaS business, which is called Matcha. You can find us at getmatcha.com. We have kind of a couple of core product offerings. One is an e-commerce CMS and blog builder for Shopify stores and e-commerce merchants. And the other is a content marketplace that allows companies to license content from premium publishers and use it in direct channels.
Yeah, and you said it so fast, but the way I like to think of Matcha is like if you're merchants, or if you own your own e-commerce store, want to make more money from their blog, you install Matcha. That's like, because
Nice way to put it.
it connects it in two ways. It helps you understand the analytics of the monetization, but it also helps you place products into the content, which helps improve monetization. And then it can help kind of direct you in what content to publish next to increase monetization.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I think our point of view is that the blog has just for a long time been really under leveraged and underutilized in the context of e-commerce. And so everything we're building is to try to make the blog a much more powerful asset for e-commerce marketers, as it has long been for B2B marketers.
Yeah, and I think certain industries have to do it. Some industries could have done it, but chose other channels like social. And now today, I think almost any business can benefit from it. Whether it is prioritization number 1 or 3 or 7 is a different story, but I think there's always a clear benefit there. It's on the roadmap at some point. So let's talk about the consolidation of markets. And you kind of research this yourself. And if you want to share your screen, you can go ahead. Like what are we seeing in terms of tech tools gobbling up other tech tools today?
I think so. I'm really fascinated by consolidation generally because it's just interesting to think about strategically, like why businesses would acquire other businesses. But I'm especially interested in it in the context of being in marketing technology, because for the last 5 or 6 years, I've just watched such an explosion in the number of marketing tools that have come online. And, I think you have done such a good job of helping companies navigate how many tools there are and put together stacks that make sense for their specific context. And another person that's obviously been a real thought leader on this front is Scott Brinker. And so I've long studied some of his philosophy about this, but I thought maybe it would help to kind of back up a few years and kind of like try to contextualize this a little bit. A few years ago, Scott was writing at the time a lot about this idea that everyone had wanted to build an all-in-one marketing platform, but very few had actually succeeded in that effort. And he really kind of came away with that kind of observation, explaining it for 2 core reasons. One, the scope of marketing had exploded so much over the last decade that companies actually couldn't build all-in-one platforms because it was too expensive, and the number of features, would be, 1, too expensive to build, and they probably just wouldn't be good enough. And then 2, companies really weren't promoting themselves as platforms. They were not marketing themselves as platforms. They were marketing kind of core feature functionality. And so this promise of living in a world with an all-in-one platform just like really hadn't realized itself. And so what he predicted is that we would move into this world of multi-platform stacks where you're going to have several core platforms around which you have lots of different point tools. And I think in many ways that has definitely proven to be true, certainly in e-commerce. And I think the question that a lot of us are asking now, given we've seen the continued proliferation of marketing technology, is whether or not that will continue over the next, let's say, half decade. And so I'm excited to kind of dig into that question. But I thought maybe that context would be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think elaborate on that just a little bit more. It will be impossible to be one tool that does everything, because at some point you actually would just want to branch off certain components of that or have them add on. And then maybe it's owned by the same parent company, but it will have to be separated at some point just because of the nature of each business operating slightly differently than every single other business. And so for that reason, it's interesting. That's the creation or the proliferation of the tool stack, right? The tech stack. And I think that as merchants and and in technology ourselves, so B2B tech and our B2C technology stacks, we never really stop to think about how does this tool work with this other tool, or what am I going to outgrow this tool in 6 months or in 3 years? There was and like everybody selling a tool, they're really not incentivized to share that information very clearly. And there is, so for that reason, there's a bit of a lack of transparency. And because the tool stack sort of emerged in the way that you just described and Scott Brinker had predicted, there's no process. No one takes a class in how to like choose the right tool stack. Nobody taught you this in college. No one taught you this in high school, that's for sure. And no one's teaching it to you in business. It's something you just learn on your own without realizing that it's actually a firm component of the business. It's as real as HR or compliance or finance. It is, an emergent department, the technologist, and not the technology department where you're thinking about your own product, app, features, that kind of thing, but the stack, right? And so that department exists inside every organization now, but no one has a person dedicated to it. And oftentimes, different departments have different people dedicated to it. So technology has their stack, marketing has their stack, customer service has their stack, and then a multi-stack business doesn't have the hands talking to each other. And we run into those problems. And I think that's what's bringing around consolidation today, which is that we need more tools talking to each other. Maybe it started with integration and it became consolidation. But maybe between that and the aligned interests of each tool, if they're serving the same merchant and they have overlapping audiences, what other reasons do you believe apps might be consolidating today?
I think, I would say that's a good summary, and I agree with all of it. I think another thing that's kind of functionally changed is that a lot of the apps that have been developed over the last 5 years have become API first, and so they play nicer with other tools, and so that creates a lot of ability for SaaS vendors to actually become partners from a product standpoint, and then explore deeper integrations together, which often lead to acquisition or consolidation. But I think that's probably like the core technical reason is tools work better together. I think in the context of business strategy, like that's a place that I get super interested in. I mean, it's, when you think about why another company would acquire another company, there are all kinds of reasons. And, like I've kind of like looked into this a little bit to try to understand the philosophy around M&A. And, like McKinsey, the consulting group, says that there are 6 archetypes of acquisition. And I think in the context of e-commerce and the type of vendors that we see in the Shopify ecosystem and BigCommerce and Magento ecosystem, it's probably simpler than that. It's probably like 3 main reasons that companies would acquire other companies. And it's we want to buy cash and revenue and get bigger faster. One is we want to buy IP or people that we can't build or grow internally. It would be cheaper for us to buy than build. And then the third reason is we want to buy access to another market segment. We want to move up or down market, or we want to buy access to a certain niche. And I think that those are kind of the three business reasons driving consolidation alongside of the technical evolution that we've seen.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's almost always going to be an overlap of those three that drive the ultimate acquisition. One of the things I wish I had asked John and Mike when I had them is how their teams felt about being acquired and what that looked like. You know, I could see it not leaving so many happy faces, but for us, as we think about the increase in competition, what do you think this means for a new starting tool or technology, probably hyper niche, whatever, however niche, I'm trying to say, whatever way to say it. And we already are seeing increased competition, obviously a plethora of apps entering a lot of different spaces. Do they need to niche harder? Do they need to think about how they might merge with other tools sooner? Or is it over? Is it just beginning? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I'll try to structure and organize them in a way that is coherent for your listeners. I think I do some mentoring through the TechStars program to companies. And so I've seen a fair number of, kind of pre-revenue startups that are looking to build marketing tech products. Mm-hmm. And one of the common slides in the pitch deck is, marketers use 20 plus tools and marketers are overwhelmed by data silos. And it's kind of this common pitch that you hear from a lot of marketing technology products. And I think it's probably true, and maybe kind of over the last 3 years, it's probably been very true that people feel overwhelmed. But I think that kind of masks some of the underlying realities that are contributing to that. One of which is, you kind of pointed to it earlier, when people feel they have a problem, they Google tool to solve X problem, and then they buy the tool without considering its strategic relevance to a number of other tools. And so it's often kind of act first rather than think strategically about technology.
It's also a Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid. Oh, this tool doesn't do this one thing, so I'll put this other tool on top. Oh, but that doesn't do this kind of thing. Oh, I got a little thing here. And then you've just got a pile of Band-Aids. I don't know. Right.
It's part of it's immediate gratification, but it leads to organizations buying lots of tools and then in many cases not end up using them all that well or under leveraging them. And that's a waste of money. And it's also not great for SaaS vendors who are trying to build meaningful products. I think the other piece to this is everybody wants to achieve personalization, right? Like in an omni-channel world in e-commerce, that's the goal. And so a lot of these tools were developed to facilitate performance in certain channels. And that's kind of made it one, you can achieve personalization if you're really good at stitching together different tools, but it's also made personalization harder for more general purpose teams that have fewer resources to actually achieve personalization. Really? Which is kind of one of the interesting ironies to this. And then I think another kind of thing to think about is at a certain point, as you strive for personalization as a merchant, it becomes this game of optimization that might have diminishing returns because, how much more time should you spend segmenting your list rather than creating the next campaign for the next season? And that becomes a real kind of decision to trade off against. But I thought that would be worthwhile to point out before we get back to your original question, which was, what should a new marketing technology company think about? And, the way I've thought about it is first and foremost, will there be consolidation? Yes. We will see a lot of consolidation over the next 5 years. Will there also be continued proliferation? I think the answer is yes. And maybe that's dissatisfying to a lot of people, but that's supported in the data. What we see last year is marketing technology companies, there was a net increase, 14% net increase in terms of the number of marketing applications.
But isn't that less growth than the year before? So are we reaching the top of an S curve? And that's because technically percentage of growth and number are, two different things. The number might increase, but the percentage of growth over that previous year number might decrease. But that's interesting. So we're reaching the top of the S curve. It's still growing, absolutely, but we're curving to the top of that.
It seems like it's growing still, but slowing. And there's also some legitimate churn. There's close to 10% churn in terms of the number of marketing technology companies that did not exist from the year before because they were either acquired or folded.
And not, you said fired or folded?
Either acquired or
Oh,
folded.
okay, acquired
Yeah.
or folded. All right.
Yeah.
And so when they get acquired, they move into the other company. I'd love to remove the acquisitions and just think about the ones that folded there and see that number. That's really interesting to think about. And we could even go into a deeper sidetrack. And we're talking with a lot of Shopify app partners today about how the increase in the ability to start a tech company or a marketing technology company has increased so drastically that anybody with an idea might be able to get a tool off the ground, and that can increase the churn rate on this. But looking at long-term stable and mid to higher growth technology companies, and there's certainly nothing wrong with anybody making $100,000 a year off of a tool and then maintaining that. It's a totally fine business. But I think the larger and more interesting sectors to look at are businesses that are either disrupting or very larger incumbents in some of the spaces. And so
I think that's right. And maybe just to close that final loop is, what should an early stage marketing technology vendor be thinking about? I think there's one simple answer to this in the context of all this consolidation and proliferation conversation, and that's that increasingly we have platforms in the form of the shopping carts, especially Shopify, that have very powerful ecosystems. And the platforms have in effect become this version of a landlord. And so if you're building a new marketing technology product, what you really need to be thinking about is your go-to-market strategy within the context of that ecosystem. And if you're swimming with that ecosystem in terms of the way merchants are buying software, you have a much better shot if you're swimming kind of against the wave of the way merchants are buying software within that ecosystem.
So don't launch a technology product on a dying trend.
That's a good way to think about it.
Google Plus is what you're saying.
Well,
sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's too late. You've already invested when you see that a certain channel or technology is dying.
Yeah, certainly from like a trend standpoint, don't fight against the wave. But I'm saying more about the way you go to market. I mean, if you're going to build an app for a Shopify merchant, you go to market through the App Store alongside of other channels. And if you decide not to go to market through the App Store, that can be a lot less efficient go to market, and you can kind of like reduce the overall performance and signal that you need in the early stages.
I gotcha. And that's actually a question I get from a lot of companies. I take a lot of meetings with a lot of different technology companies, and some of them aren't in e-commerce, and they're asking for my advice on how to break into the Shopify app ecosystem, or should we launch on the App Store? And these are like, some of them are very large companies in the millions of ARR already, but they just never thought about this segment, and they're coming in. And that's something that we actually, it's not even in our notes to discuss, but like talking about the movement of markets into e-commerce is another fascinating thing. I think a lot about how Zendesk has a Shopify integration, but Gorgeous focused completely in Shopify just really owns them, because it's the robustness of the tool, and the difference between a technology partner that has an integration versus understands the needs of the user is kind of the concept that is really brought to the forefront there. And I think that's something that people will always continue to miss. And the bigger the company, the more revenue they have, the less of these niche opportunities matter to them. And that's why the quote riches are in the niches. And that's why there's always more opportunities. Is there anything we need to do from our own code base standpoint, if we know that we're creating Shopify apps today and we're going to probably look to merge or get acquired, is there any sort of best practices that you think people should be thinking about now, or anything like that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's a little bit, the answer probably is just not all that formulaic. It's probably you build an application that solves a real problem. And as you build traction, you invest in building legitimate relationships with larger applications that would find real strategic value in the product that you've built. And if you don't invest in those relationships, that probably doesn't put you on the right path for acquisition if that's your goal. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you might not need to go invest in relationships if you've got an escape velocity product, and the traction is in the numbers, and the company needs what you've built really badly.
Yeah. And we haven't officially said it, but there's a few kind of drivers of consolidation in the market, aside from maybe the needs of the consumers to have an all-in-one solution, which again we've alluded to is on paper it's great, but in practice leaves room for improving features or becoming too clunky or a disruptor in the space. So what other drivers are we from maybe I guess it's from the supply side, would you say is causing consolidation?
Well, so I kind of say what you mean again by the supply side.
I think about it instead of from the, like, let's say the merchant or because we don't even have to talk about e-commerce technology specifically, but from the user standpoint, saying I can benefit from these things, and from the company standpoint, well, maybe we covered it. It's like more revenue, more customers. It's the three things you alluded to before. So maybe that's not the best way to look at it.
Well, I think it's an interesting place. I mean, I think, and you can add some more depth and color there because, I mean, why would consolidation happen? Well, one reason would be the customers demanding it. There's a certain type of customer that really wants a more all-in-one platform because they represent a persona that prefers a more general purpose toolkit. There's another customer persona that wants elite tools for every single job to be done, and they're capable of leveraging them. And a general purpose all-in-one solution is not going to be right for them. And there's enough of both types of personas to build big businesses for both. But
it's a spectrum too. You just laid out the two ends of it, and then we kind of walk through, and I think it incrementally goes up. I think incrementally. So it's like there's somebody in the middle who's semi-technical and needs some really good all-in-one tools, but also needs a handful of hyper-personalized tools and so forth. And what makes this really interesting is we might be thinking about in our own companies and for, I think, especially on the merchant side, various stages of our business would relate to various ideas here. When we have enough resources, we can have hyper specialized elite people. But when we're just starting out and we're the CEO and we have to do everything, we probably do need all in one. And this means what this is kind of interesting in a way is that consolidation might lead towards, in some ways, churn, because I actually am going to look for tools outside of an all-in-one solution that was great for me early on or in a mid-market thing. What's funny about that, as I say it, is that most enterprise solutions have way more features. And so the larger companies tend to use the big clunky guys instead of a series of hyper-personalized tools. I wonder if this is a corporate culture problem or like it's because, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem to align with what we might want to expect.
Well, it's, I think it has something to do with corporate kind of culture, but in some ways it's politics, right? Because when you buy technology at enterprise, it's more expensive. And if you buy technology and end up not using it or not leveraging it enough, you might be called out by your boss or your manager or your board. And so sometimes it's politically more expedient to just use a brand name platform, even if it can't do all of the things that best in class point solutions would do.
Wow. This means that there is a whole opportunity for optimization in the mid-market and enterprise companies to incentivize, from a cultural standpoint, taking risks and using more hyper-personalized or high-value niche tools instead of staying within the lines. And I don't think a lot of company cultures embrace failure, and so we're unexpectedly moving into the topic of digital transformation is sometimes what it's called, but like transformational business, and where you as leaders of organizations need to think about how you empower your team members to do that. And now we're saying all the way down to the tools they use. I don't know. I'm just ranting on this. It's off topic, but it's interesting to think about.
I love that stuff too. I mean, I think part of what's interesting about it is it points to kind of the evolution of software itself, where there was kind of a phase one that was built on, kind of like the GUI, the graphic user interface. And then there's this phase two that's really about adoption. And you kind of see models of go-to-market that facilitate a bottoms-up adoption, where employees can actually try software and then effectively upsell it into their managers. And I think that trend is a really powerful one in terms of the development of better and better technology and the development of more empowered employees. So I think that's fascinating. The other thing I wanted to say about just kind of consolidation is like, there's another reason that consolidation would happen. And of course it's the business side of it. That's what you meant by the supply side. And that's, you've got these two types of companies functionally. One is these small SaaS businesses, and then you've got large businesses, and functionally their relationships are different because one business has a lot more leverage in the market than another. And so if you're a young SaaS business, you really have a lot more incentive to focus on deepening your value proposition with your initial customer base and making your value like truly precise rather than broadening the value. Whereas if you're a large company, you've got all those reasons I mentioned before, where you've got the actual leverage from a cash flow standpoint, from a balance sheet standpoint, to go acquire IP or acquire cash or acquire a would-be competitor and eliminate them from the market. And I think that's like another reason driving this. And then kind of when I look at like what's going on specifically in e-commerce, what's so fascinating to me is if you look back to Brinker's point, which is there's going to be this multi-platform stack. I think what we've seen is that in e-commerce, there are really kind of two platforms around which the e-commerce merchant builds their stack. And I'd be interested to know if you agree with this. If you push back on it, I'd welcome it. But I think that those two core platforms are the shopping cart and the ESP. The ESP in e-commerce really represents the CRM. And I think the question is, over the next 5 years, as both of these two types of companies build really strong businesses, they're very sticky. They've got a lot of cash flow to drive acquisition. Who really drives consolidation from a marketing standpoint? Is it the cart or the ESP? And I've got my own opinions on that, but that's one of the real kind of like fascinating questions to me about what the next 5 years look like.
Yeah. And it is kind of odd that these two aren't seen more as mandatorily combined. I think there are a couple of e-commerce platforms out there that have deep CRM functionality, but Shopify has Shopify Mail, which is garbage. And they have their own analytics, so you can kind of see a little bit of the customer journey, their own kind of CRM, but they are not, an email service provider. They are not an SMS provider. They are not ever going to do Messenger and all these other things. And it really is odd that to me, like, if the customer journey is what we care about, and the customer journey happens on channel and on site, then we need one tool to manage that process. It shouldn't be the two tools, the channel tool, largely ESP, and the site tool, largely, maybe for you could talk about the user experience design, how they feel when they see the brand and how they interact with products before they, of course, physically acquire the product and all of that stuff. I would have to imagine they come together, but Shopify will never acquire Klaviyo, and Klaviyo will never acquire Shopify. So who is it? I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I shouldn't say never. Shopify could acquire Klaviyo, but it's what do you think?
Well, I think, I guess I don't see them coming together because I think they own really different portions of the stack. So I think the cart really owns transaction, and underlying transaction is everything that I would associate with back-end finance and ops and logistics. And I think that we've seen Shopify really kind of demonstrate where the bulk of their R&D investments lie, and it's in the finance stack and it's in the logistics stack more than it's in the marketing stack. And I think the ESPs and the CRMs, they really own communication. And so from communication is so much more opportunity to go build and aggregate real value for the end user in the context of SMS and mobile and social and all the other kind of layers to communication that have kind of contributed to all the proliferation over the last few years.
But if I am a finance tool, if that's what CART is, if that's the end goal. If I can improve communication, I'll get more transactions. So I should want to vertically integrate up the stack so that I can, because if I have a better email service provider, SMS provider, directly attached, I will get more transactions, and then I'll make more money, and then and then I can make money off of that stage and that stage and that stage. So I feel like
I think that's like it's a super logical place to arrive. I think the question would be, like, from a business prioritization standpoint, is it better for a company like Shopify to build the best possible ecosystem for the best possible marketing technology products to emerge? Or is it better for them to try to vertically integrate them? And so far, it seems like they're saying it's better for us to have an ecosystem of the best products and let them compete and build the best products so our merchants succeed, rather than owning it vertically. And maybe it'll change, but so far, my bet is that within the next few years, they don't go that direction.
Well, if I guess Toby is as cutthroat as Bezos, right? Because that was what he did. He built a great ecosystem for you to place your product on Amazon.com. And then he started literally cutting you out and just going straight to the manufacturer, and business, thousands of businesses have been, dropped to zero because of that. And I think that's what and I don't know if that will happen in Shopify. I do like to think it won't, but I would say we are now at the tipping point where the platform has become so big that it might not need the partners as strongly as it did need them before. Now, that doesn't mean that Shopify will make a malicious attack towards its partners. I think what happened with MailChimp and Shopify is an interesting story where there was a change in Shopify policy. MailChimp said no. They ended up pulling the integration out, and then Shopify created a competitor to MailChimp for its users. And so you could imagine another tussle happening in another market sector, maybe with an SEO image optimization tool. We just heard from Plugin SEO, right? And or a landing page builder like Shogun, or what we've seen a little bit with Recharge and subscription billing. And what's changed there recently. So they might not tackle Klaviyo directly, but if we were taking our current trajectory, my belief is if we were taking our current trajectory to an infinite degree angle, we would have to see pure consolidation until they owned every partner technology in the stack and had small departments running those, as opposed to them being independently operated. But that's a sort of theoretical future.
What's so interesting to think about too is if Klaviyo's real threat is Shopify eventually owning ESP and the communication stack, is it better for Klaviyo to build the world's best e-commerce ESP that's ever been built and continuing to deepen that value proposition, or is it better for them to aggregate more value across the communication stack? And I think that's a really interesting question that will be like fun to watch Klaviyo play out over the next year or two. And we should have this conversation again yearly, but maybe in the next 2.5 years, and see where we've landed on it, because it's going to be a fascinating ride.
Yeah. In fact, maybe we should place some bets and then check back on them. Yeah, my bet is that I agree with you that by this time next year, Shopify will have made virtually no progress in the email service provider space. They won't have their own SMS tool. They won't have they have like a dinky messenger tool, but I don't even count that. And that Klaviyo will continue to expand. I think Klaviyo will expand channel wise, but we had Mike from SMS Bump on. He's so far ahead of them from features and functionality. I don't think Klaviyo this time next year will even be as good as SMS Bump is right now. And so for that reason, I think there's still opportunities for other apps and incumbents to continue to innovate in those niche spaces. SMS no longer is a niche; it's a red market, but there will continue to be blue oceans that stem from it. What about you? Any bold predictions?
I don't know if I can be as bold as you, but I would say that over the next year, I don't see Shopify making any real consolidated effort to move into the communication stack in a way that I would view as meaningful. I do expect that we will see leading ESPs or companies alongside of like adjacent ESPs with SMS or customer reviews even looking to aggregate more value. So that their platforms are expanding from the core value proposition into something that includes multiple kind of core communication outlets.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And by the way, there's a very fine line between being bold and being stupid. So we'll see which side I'm on in 12 months. But awesome. Well, let's leave it at that. Fynn, if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
My email address is Fynn. That's it's like Huckleberry Finn, but it's with a Y. So FYNN at getmatcha.com. And I'm on Twitter, but I always fail to remember my handle. It's at Fynn Glover 19. So those are the two places.
I'm going to find it. Fynn. Let's see if I got it. Oh my gosh. Nailed it. That's funny. You don't remember your own handle.
Well, I've been on Twitter since 2009, but I've only started using it in the last 6 months, really.
Welcome. I was used it a lot in my agency days, and now I use it here and there.
Yeah.
So it's
I actually use LinkedIn a lot more than any other channel.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is perfect for the Shopify app partner ecosystem. And of course, I'm in dozens of Slack groups, but aside from those, the LinkedIn's where I like to go. Facebook groups are great if you want to talk to a merchant that knows nothing. But like LinkedIn is where I go for the intelligent conversation with thought leaders like yourself and all the big players in the space that talk about like bigger ideas and massive mergers and acquisitions. It's a lot of fun to follow those threads.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure. I love talking with you, and we will absolutely do this again and see if our predictions come true. And I'm going to write down my predictions and for this year, and make sure that next year I come a little bit better prepared, and we'll see what happens in the market as things continue to evolve.
Likewise, Derek. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Awesome. And with that, everybody, we will wrap it here. All the presentations from this will be available online in a couple of days. I'll send an email out to you shortly to make sure that you get access to them. If you want to book a consultation with me, a partner call, we can talk about getting your app listed in the app directory. We can talk about how we can promote your ebooks to our audience, how we can get your podcast listed in our directory, and any virtual live events you have. And of course, we want to get you up on our tech landscape and possibly even speaking or interviewing somebody at one of our next merchant-facing events. It's been an honor and privilege to be working alongside so many amazing Shopify app partners, people that have been doing this for years before me, before I even knew what e-commerce was in some cases, and to see the growth of certain technology products, see the execution and hard work and sweat behind them, and see it pay off in the acquisitions and conversations that we had earlier about that. I am personally so passionate about e-commerce and e-commerce technology in particular. I just love showcasing this, and I think that there's a lot of value in understanding how technology works with product and market in order to create a beautiful trifecta that grows, let's say the merchant's business, but through it also our own. All right, that was my rant number 7. Thanks so much, and I'll see all you guys later.